Welcome to Engage ICT. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo with KMUW. Wichita has a new police chief, so this is a great time to talk about the challenges, strengths, and opportunities for our community and law enforcement. On our panel this evening, we have Desmond Bryant White, the manager of Destination Innovations Project Progeny, Chris Green, the managing editor of the Kansas Leadership Center's Journal magazine, Yeni Silva-Renteria with the Wichita Taskforce, and Joe Sullivan, the new chief of police for Wichita. Thank you all for joining us. Let's have a round of applause for our panel. I want to jump in here with you, Yeni, and ask you that, so among other things, you are on the community task force that was launched after the death of Cedric Lofton. Will you help describe the dynamics between community and law enforcement that we see today? And then how would you describe the current state of just our criminal justice system in general?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. Well, just to talk about the relationship between law enforcement and the community, I can definitely say that it's not the best at this moment. There is mistrust. There is, in a way, there's many ways to improve how police officers may respond to some of our community members. So, especially for related to the task force that I participated, I think it was a very intense and very, I don't know how to word it, but very intense conversations with law enforcement. Definitely at the end, we came up with many recommendations, which some of them are very good. Some of them are in progress. Some of them have been completed. However, I think what we continue to struggle is sometimes some of the officers respond to the different crises within our community, especially within the minority community. So I just want to make sure that as we encourage the different trainings and all the recommendations that we made, that the officers, there's more accountability and ownership. An officer chooses to be an officer. And just the training itself, I believe that there is many opportunities to improve that.
Thank you, Yeni. I'd like to come to you next, Desmond. You manage Progeny, a group reimagining the juvenile justice system and exploring community-based alternatives to it. What rules or systemic norms are causing challenges right now from your vantage point?
Well, hello, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good day and having a great evening. Thank you for having me. If I was going to answer that question, I'd say the rules or systemic issue would be profiling. Just to sum it up in a word, profiling. We know that Northeast Wichita is more morally monitored than other parts of town, and we just have to ask ourselves, why is that? Why is that population more heavily policed more than other areas? And then when we start to looking at those that are in jail, we notice that although Wichita is only 10% African American, those numbers are highly more so in the system. So 25%, 20%. So we just looking at equality across the board. The gang file as well. And this is, I was kind of thinking about this on the way. We have individuals that actually shoot up schools, and from my vantage point, that's dangerous. What kind of gangs are they in? Why is it that a young male that looks like me can't even wear the same color from head to toe without being considered a gang member? We have to reimagine how we think as people as well when we're categorizing youth as members of lethal gangs. If you say somebody's in a gang, you're saying that they're lethal by force and be scared of them. And at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, these are children that we're speaking of. So that's something that I've heard and also experienced myself profiling in the communities.
Thank you. Chris, to kind of round out this context that we're starting out here with, and thinking over a lot of the coverage of law enforcement and intersections with different communities that the Journal has offered over the last few years, can you discuss some of the difficulties experienced in different communities around Kansas when it comes to positive interactions with the police?
When I think about our coverage across the state, I think I kind of see like three broad trends that you often see popping up in communities. One is there's often like the simmering heat around the issue of the relationship, then an incident happens and it just brings it boiling to the surface. It takes it up to a new level. You saw that in Topeka with the police shooting of Dominic White. Another dynamic is you see political backlash. You see politicians who work to address the concerns of people about law enforcement. And in the case I'm thinking of in Wyandotte County, it was heavily addressing the concerns of people of color, found pushback. And so the mayor of Wyandotte County lost re-election in part because of his work to address concerns about public safety workers, both police and fire. But there was a police undercurrent because in Wyandotte County, some police officers were killed, and the mayor was accused of being insufficiently sensitive to that situation. Another dynamic that you see is communities working to proactively address the issue, and it's deep and daunting, but you see people taking steps to try and do it. In Garden City, when Somali immigrants, when there was an attempted plot to bomb an apartment complex where these immigrants lived, police working hard to build those relationships and to build that trust with a community that was very vulnerable. And at a place like Hutchinson, you see the police chief reaching out to athletes at the community colleges where there's been a long history of racial profiling and trying to build some rapport. And so you see these issues like popping up around the state, and it feels like in Wichita we've seen variations of all these issues, and it feels like since 2015, 2016, we've had a lifetime of issues come up into the public dialogue related to law enforcement, and you could probably devote all of your Engage ICTs this year to those issues, and it wouldn't be unwarranted.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, thank you, Chris. And now, Chief Sullivan, we'll bring it home to you here and into the present moment. So tell us now that you've been on the job for a couple of months here, about some of the challenges that are faced by police officers in maintaining public safety, what you see here in Wichita, and maybe how that compares to the big city.
Well, it's only been 1 month.
Oh, well,
But
officially.
The challenge is to balance the need to maintain public safety and at the same time not over police communities. And that can be difficult to do. As a police chief, I send resources where the crime is occurring. My deployment is data-driven. And we try to prevent crimes from happening and obviously try to apprehend the perpetrators of violent crime after the fact. And we've seen a wave of that recently here in Wichita. We've been very successful in making arrests, but at the same time, there is the risk of alienating the broader community, and that's the message that I've been trying to, and I think effectively I've gotten out to the men and women of the Wichita Police Department, is that we are taking a very strategic, a very surgical approach, and that we are not to employ any tactics that impact the greater community and make people feel that we are some type of an invading force. The entire Wichita Police Department this week is going through color of law and hate crimes training that's being given by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I intend to bring the active ABLE training, active bystandership for law enforcement, which is a program developed by the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement. I also intend to bring ICAT training, which is an evidence-based de-escalation training that has been studied and validated by the University of Cincinnati, to teach officers how to approach people in any type of emotional crisis and to handle that with the least amount of force. So I'm excited about what's to come, and that's why I'm here tonight, because I've I've been all over the city. I just came from the God Squad, meeting with religious leaders, trying to get everyone's perspective and recommendations how I can do a better job of leading the Wichita Police Department.
Thank you, Chief. Janet has a question about trauma training given to new police recruits. Janet, can you make your way to the microphone? And while she's coming, Chief Sullivan, can you kind of prioritize? That's a lot of different things that you want to do. Is there one that's just the real big one that you want to bring in first?
Well, recruitment. Right now, I'm limited in a lot of the community-based programs that I'd like to put into place because of recruitment issues and our manpower being down. And along with recruitment, of course, comes the issue of diversity. I want to recruit, but I also want to recruit a diverse pool of highly qualified applicants that are reflective of the Wichita community, so that we can better serve, and because we want to recruit officers that understand the culture of the neighborhoods that they're going to police.
I want to come to you in a moment, Janet, but I really want to ask, based off of that, is there a quality that you're really looking for in new recruits? What would change this dynamic, you think?
If I had to pick one word, I would choose empathy.
Thank you. Okay, Janet, go ahead.
Sure. So I went through the Citizens Police Academy here in Wichita, and we learned that there is a session of trauma training that our new recruits are given. So the question that I have is, what's being done to reinforce that training once they leave the academy so that they don't lose it and that we ultimately create a trauma-informed police force?
I would say currently not enough, and that's one of the things that I'm working on. Training is definitely an issue. There's not enough in-service training. There's not enough career development training. It's one of the reasons why I did, at your recommendation, visit the Kansas Leadership Institute and gave them kind of an idea of what I was looking for. And, I'm trying to remember the name of the author of When Everyone Leads. I think it's exactly what we need. And
Bride.
Yes,
Just get
thank
the plug
you.
Say
in.
that again, Chris.
Ed O'Malley and Julia Famous McBride.
We referenced the C.J. Lofton incident, and I think that's an example of the type of philosophy I want to instill in the department, that everyone needs to lead. Police officers need to lead. It's okay to question authority. It's okay to question decision-making. That's not being insubordinate. That's being helpful. That's trying to collectively choose the best course of action moving forward. So my answer to your question is not enough, and that is very high. Training is very high on my list of priorities, both at the recruit level and ongoing professional development training, pre-promotional training for new supervisors. These are all things that I'm working on. Unfortunately, things do not move as fast as I would like them to, but we're moving as fast as humanly possible. That much I can promise you.
We have several more audience questions here that I want to slip in before we continue with our discussion. Connie has a question about police in public schools. And Connie, if you would make your way to the microphone, we'll address that in a moment. But in the meantime, I have a question from Patrick, who asks, how will your police handle the mentally ill? This is actually a topic that we're getting from several audience members, and wanting more information about implementing a mental health intervention program.
So every member of the Wichita Police Department will become CIT certified again. In fact, I just paid the bill to send a couple of our instructors to become trainers. They're being trained as trainers so they can bring it back so we can accelerate the pace at which we're doing that training. I also talked about the ICAT training. That's integrated communication, assessment, and tactics. That will be part of that, and that will be combined with the active bystandership for law enforcement training, meaning that teaching officers that they have a responsibility not just for themselves, but for their fellow officers, and that they must intervene if officers are not handling a situation properly. So when you and then we have the ICT 1 unit that is out there, combined multidisciplinary team of mental health, EMS, and 1 police officer. As a result of the CJ Lofton Task Force, there's going to be county teams that are in the process of being assembled. That can't happen fast enough for me. I believe those teams need to be available throughout the city and the county 24/7. So I think we're approaching that in a multidisciplinary, not just a multidisciplinary fashion, but in a multifaceted way, because you can never take police out of the equation. So you have to train them, as I call it, to do no harm and to have resources that they can summon to take over for them. I mean, as much as possible, we were going to remove police from the equation, but things always happen that spontaneously. So I have to make sure that I have officers that are properly trained to do no harm until the professionals can get to the scene. So those teams I hope to see, those additional teams I hope to see in late winter or early spring. And right now, that would provide 18-hour-a-day coverage, 7 days a week, which will really put us at the forefront of this topic compared to other cities. So I'm really excited about that.
That does sound like it would make a shift. I'd like to come to you, Desmond, just real quickly here, and ask more about that intersection between policing and other issues such as mental health issues, and the impact that those interactions have between them. And from your vantage point, how you think we might address those complex issues, if you have any other tactics that you could share.
When we speak about mental health of officers, and I just have to be rash, I think about systematic racism. Imagine an officer that grew up in a Winfield, Kansas, majority Caucasian, I'm assuming. They go to high school there, they go to college there, they work there. Then they come to Wichita for a job to police. They get in an incident, and this is all hypothetically, they get in an incident with let's say a child. They get in an incident with a child in a public place and act in a manner that would kill this child. I'm not sure how much training we could offer those kind of people that we trust to take care of us, that we trust to protect and serve. I'm one that we most definitely need a police system in place. That's why you have systems in place, but we have to make sure that we're putting personnel, we're putting leaders in these positions that empathize with all people. And I don't know, we have to check ourselves as leaders. Are we doing that? Are we holding ourselves accountable, to these measures? Are we doing that?
So more so than the training, or in addition maybe to the training, the idea that it is critically important to recruit the right kind of people. So kind of back to
all
that.
training. I'm an avid learner. Every day I'm trying to learn something new, and I feel like if a doctor messed up on a surgery, he'd probably lose his license. If a judge is getting caught doing malpractice, a lawyer, they're going to lose their license. So we have to hold everybody accountable in those positions, no matter the training as well. And we have to make sure that the training that we do receive is coming from a perspective that will actually help the people. You can't have training without having the people that is most directly affected not at that table. If you really want to see the change that we all hope to see in our communities.
Thank you. Connie, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I'm a retired public school teacher, and I'm also served for 14 years on the Wichita Board of Education. So my question is about K-12 education, and I'm going to direct it to the chief. However, any of the people are welcome to respond. Currently, I know there are high schools in Wichita have an SRO at each one of the high schools. So my question is, what are your thoughts and plans for developing ongoing linkage with our public schools here in Wichita?
sorry, lengthy what?
linkage with our public schools here in Wichita?
Well, certainly, we work closely with the school district here in Wichita, and I plan to increase that and make that a closer relationship. We currently do have school resource officers. There is a selection process before we choose an officer to go into a school, and there is a minimum 40-hour training that the officer must go through to get certification to be a school resource officer. I would like to expand that, but I think that is a question for the schools and the community to kind of give me the proper feedback, what they would like to see, how they would like that to look. You know, but to be honest with you, I mean, right now, I'm down at least 66 officers, so I'm kind of limited in those types of programs. But what I would envision is having officers visit schools, and this is something that I did in Philadelphia, reading programs, officers participating in kids and projects of mutual interest, so they have an opportunity, and this is straight out of 21st century policing from the President Obama administration, of creating opportunities for police and local youth to interact in non-law enforcement activities and authoritative environments. Because when they do that and they have those positive interactions, they build a relationship, they build trust, and you'll see the benefit of that when they might have to interact with that officer, when maybe he has to tell them to go home and do their homework and go ahead and get off the corner, or when the officer might have to respond to a home to handle a domestic and the child is present, the officer's seen as a less threatening presence. So to the extent I can, I'll be looking to sponsor those programs like I did in Philadelphia, and that's why recruitment is so important to me. And I agree. I want to find young, and I use the word empathetic, officers that are service-oriented, community-oriented, problem solvers, and a diverse pool of officers that are reflective of this community.
Thank you, Chief. I have an audience question that relates to that very nicely. Let me pull this up here. This was submitted in advance from someone wondering about the demographics of police, and particularly key police staff. And they ask, are the demographics of our city reflected in the demographics of police staff, particularly among top staff or command level staff? And how much of a discrepancy is there, if there is a discrepancy there?
I would say that it's better than most cities, but it's not. It's not exactly reflective. There's no doubt about it, and that's certainly a key part of what the goals that I've set for myself to improve that. I certainly don't have enough women commanders. One of the things that did surprise me was the lack of female representation. I think I have one lieutenant who's a female.
Out of how many? Are we talking dozens or hundreds or?
No, dozens. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just trying to remember
Just one.
a lot of information to digest in a quick period of time. But the same can be said for officers of color, and it certainly is my responsibility to create more opportunities for advancement for them. And we'll be making promotions shortly, and I think we're going to make some small progress in those promotions. And then what we need, and I am going to create the position that I will have someone in the department who will be my representative for diversity and inclusion, constantly looking at not just promotions, but the hiring process and the promotional process, but also as career development opportunities. Make sure that the special units are properly represented, making sure opportunities for training, opportunities to go out and represent the department. I've been doing that myself. I can't attend everything I'm invited to, so when I send a representative, I'm being very conscious of who I'm sending and making sure that that I'm diversifying those choices and making sure that the department is being represented in a proper way when I do that.
Oh, go ahead, Yeni. Oh,
Okay. If you allow me to add just one more thing, I think recruitment is important, but also retention. And that comes with the culture of the police department right now. We see a lot of officers that from minority communities that are coming in, however, they're leaving. or even the ones that are there, they're leaving just because they're not feeling the support or, the inclusion of what we're talking about, right? So I will definitely encourage you to not only recruit, but also work on changing that cultural of aspect. And I've heard from several officers that how they feel that they don't belong just because of I don't know about the current one, but I know that in the past, how it has been for them.
I want to, go ahead.
No, I 100% agree.
I want to ask you another question in a moment, Yeni, but first, you're talking about changing the culture. What would be, are there any brainstorms happening or ideas kind of being tossed around for ways to kind of do that? It's such an amorphous sort of thing. Do you have any thoughts there?
I think it's just cultural awareness, right? And definitely an intention of creating that awareness and for the officers to be invested in having a partner that looks different than them, which is going to take a lot of, changing and adopting and making changes, but definitely it's going to be the ownership of the officers to be willing to. And with the 600, 700 officers that we have, I don't know what percentage it is, but definitely I can say that it has been a challenge for some of the officers to feel accepted.
And Yeni, you were part of the interview process for Chief Sullivan, or part of some of those conversations. Will you share a bit about current efforts in the community to help increase that transparency, education, and partnership with law enforcement?
Some of the work that I have done as a community member and as a part of the organization that I work with, which is International Rescue Committee, and we work with immigrants and refugees. So making sure that there is that cultural awareness that I was talking about, that we have conversations between officers on how to respond based on that culture of that person. I had incidents where an officer showed up to a call, and because of the language barrier, because of the misunderstanding of the culture of, for example, a domestic violence situation, right, on how an officer handled the situation, it has created a mistrust rather than a trusting relationship. So the work that I have done is just being in between, right, the community and the law enforcement, trying to understand, and that's the reason why I also signed up for the Citizens Police Academy, trying to understand what that looks like for an officer, but and then having those conversations. I have participated in many different things with officers just to bring that awareness of cultural and what does that look like whenever they're showing up at somebody's home that looks different than them.
Thank you. Chief, I have a question from Vanessa, who submitted this in advance. She writes, late last year, the Wichita Eagle ran a story regarding a police officer and the mayor. While reading the story, I learned that the officer's camera was shut off during the interaction. I don't have an opinion on the incident either way, nor do I have a vested interest in it. However, I would like to know when exactly are officers' body cameras turned on? What are the necessary circumstances for them to be turned on, and what is the penalty if they aren't turned on when they should be? I think that's something a lot of people actually wonder about, is that whole thing with body cameras. Yeah.
Okay, don't get me in trouble with the mayor. So the issue was, the body camera was on. The question is, when was it turned on? Now, when an officer begins to have an interaction with a citizen, if it's anything other than, if it's official in nature, he or she is supposed to activate their body-worn camera. If they do not, and it comes to our attention, and we do random audits, there is escalating discipline. Obviously, the first or second time in a non-critical incident, it's mentoring, it's counseling, and then it escalates into more serious discipline as the number of transgressions increase, kind of as you would expect. But the answer to the question is they're supposed to activate that camera anytime they begin an official interaction with the citizen and notify the citizen that they're activating the camera. There are some exceptions. Now, if you're interviewing someone who's the victim of a sex crime, or juveniles are present. There are some privacy restrictions, and that's why there's also some restrictions on what video that we might not, if it involves a crime victim, we might not release publicly. But as in general sense, officers are supposed to activate those cameras at the beginning of an interaction.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo with KMUW. This is Engage ICT. We're talking about policing Wichita with Desmond, Bryant White with Progeny, Chris Green with the Kansas Leadership Center, Yeni Silva-Renteria with the Wichita Taskforce, and Wichita's new police chief, Joe Sullivan. Thank you for joining us. I have a listener question from Karen, who writes, Chief Sullivan, you once stated in Philadelphia that the vast majority of violence occurs in poor neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. Do you believe the same of Wichita?
I think that because also in neighborhoods that are poor, and unfortunately in this country, that's all too often neighborhoods of color, those neighborhoods also face the challenges associated with poverty, from a history of discrimination. In Philadelphia, we have a history of redlining. So the fact of the matter in Philadelphia is that anywhere from 85 to 90% of the shooting victims in Philadelphia, unfortunately, were citizens of color. I don't think it is to that degree, but unfortunately, citizens of color are unfortunately overly impacted by violence here in Wichita. I think that's true, just not to the extent that it was in Wichita, and I'm committed to doing something about that.
And you doing something about that would mean moving beyond just this arena of policing. The root problem feels like it's very much beyond just the issue of law enforcement.
Oh, absolutely. And that becomes a challenge because, obviously as the police chief, I can't fix poverty. I can't fix inadequate housing, food insecurity. In Philadelphia, it would be a failed educational system. But I still have to find a way to police in a fair and constitutional manner, a manner that is not indiscriminate and that is very data-driven and very targeted. But often that does mean more police resources dedicated to neighborhoods of color, and that presents for significant challenges. But we're aware of those challenges, and that's why I very closely monitor my officers and their activities and hold them responsible when they step out of line.
Did you want to say something, Desmond?
Yes. I feel like the same energy that we can use to police those same communities, we could take that same energy to show love to those communities. No, I'm a poet, so I appreciate the claps. But no, most definitely, we have to use that same energy, like we spoke about, investing in a different community alternatives. I think that if we be proactive in the youth that are in our city, perhaps we would have more that grow up and want to be police officers if we're interacting with them the correct way when they're a child. And I think that's vital. So as we continue to talk about building those relationships, building healthy, safe relationships with the community, we should start, as soon as possible, reading ages, right? But also, every step of the way. The same way that we get taxed in the court system every step of the way, we should be able to lead our children to success every step of the way.
Chris, I want to shift to you here for a moment. The Journal printed a piece on policing ethics recently. Can you talk about ethics and the decertification database and what it's for, how it's being used, how it might be utilized going forward?
Yeah, to a certain extent, that this is a question of how many acronyms do you want from me in this?
Just say all the words.
All the words, yeah. So I think an important overarching point is that probably most people aren't aware of how police are regulated, and how that there is the certification is tracked, and there's an agency in Kansas called, and I'm going to look at my notes so I get it exactly right. The Kansas Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training, which is commonly known as CPOST. And so they make decisions when an officer has violated the law often. Domestic violence is a common reason, but it can also be something as simple as lying about your timesheet. You can be decertified and not be allowed to be a law enforcement officer in the state. And that information goes into a database that is run by a nonprofit. It's the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, which goes by the acronym IATList, I believe, is how it's said. So, so Wichita, so this database is sort of a way of addressing concerns about police misconduct and allowing agencies to share information. The challenge is that there's not all that many that do it. Wichita, our reporter Roxy Hamill told me today, is one of the agencies that does, but it's only of like one of 59 out of 371 agencies in the state that actually use the database. And it's growing in use and growing in awareness and prominence as a way of holding police accountable when they don't behave correctly or according to the standards of their profession. But there are just a number of challenges related to it. Most police officers support, sharing information about decertification, or most in law enforcement support it, but it's challenging. Everybody kind of has their own different rules and standards and the ways that they do their work, and so it's just no one wants it to be a mandate, or a lot of people don't want it to be a mandate. There's been some talk in the legislature of passing legislation that would require it to happen. And then it's just very hard to recruit officers, and it's just another thing to be out there. And it doesn't address situations where someone resigns voluntarily or someone is not found to have committed wrongdoing. Like, that doesn't impact your certification, and many of the issues that can be controversial are not necessarily ones related to firing. So it sort of represents another effort to build trust, but it seems like there's no single effort that builds all the trust that might be necessary to really strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and their communities.
Thank you. Chief Sullivan, when it comes to the decertification considerations and an officer being told they are no longer practicing, if an officer is decertified in another state, how do we make sure that people are truly held accountable for their actions and aren't simply given a different form of authority over the public, for example, through private security company? There are a lot of different ways to wield power over different people. Is there anything? I mean, I recognize there's a whole slew of complications just there, but it also begs the question of where might former officers go beyond policing.
Yeah, and we have very little control over that.
Yeah.
Very little. Officers can, when they lose their decertification, so if anyone applies to be a member of the Wichita Police Department, part of the background investigation process is to check the national database. And again, that is a problem with not enough departments participating. So there is the possibility that you could not find out, but we do a very extensive background investigation process to try to track that down, and that includes social media and the standard media to try to determine, even if someone's not in the database, were they ever a law enforcement officer somewhere, and of course we contact that jurisdiction. But as far as officers seeking employment, I mean, if they meet the requirements of the state to carry a firearm, there's not a whole lot that we can do about that. So that's a legitimate problem and a legitimate area of concern.
I have an anonymous question from an audience member asking, are officers required to do any community service? That's an interesting question to me.
No, it's highly encouraged and certainly rewarded, and we try to recognize them as much as possible. We have our community policing officers, and I think they do absolutely phenomenal work. I mean, I've been really amazed since I came here. I mean, I look at all of the different charity activities that were done over the holiday season by officers in the department, and many of those officers are paying for that out of their pocket. And I attended as many of those events as I possibly could. I'd like to see more involvement. I just had this discussion with someone in the community today. In fact, when Hug-A-Dad, the organization I met with this morning, you know, asking for officers, beat officers, to take the time to get out and walk among the community. And where I come from, that we call that park and walk, and I really want to see that. And I'm going to do everything I can to encourage that and to make sure that we do it. But again, that's why right now recruitment, and you 100% correct, retention is so important. And I am very concerned about retention, and I do agree there is a problem. I've lost, in just the short time I've been there, I've lost 3 or 4 officers of color, and I'm looking into that to find out exactly why. And as I said, that's why we're establishing the position of the diversity and inclusion and equity officer, to make sure that people, everyone in the department, feels like they're appreciated and they're valued. I look forward to making sure that all officers, feel that community policing is their responsibility, not just the community policing officers. And I'm going to do my very best, but right now I'm very limited. And one of the biggest complaints that I receive from the community is response time. So it's like a kind of a struggle that I have. I want officers to spend less time answering 911 calls and more time interacting with the community, but at the same time, when we're not able to answer emergency calls in what I consider to be an acceptable time, that's a problem. And I think it's a legitimate concern of the community.
So, Yeni, I want to come to you. There's this kind of idea of educating and, learning more on both sides. And you graduated from the Citizens Police Academy in May, and have also participated in those diversity panels that you mentioned a little bit ago. That those were put on by WPD, correct? Can you talk about what you learned and how those conversations with officers went, kind of what you've learned and what you think that they learned through those different interactions?
It was a very good interaction, and we offer the panelists, we offer a safe space. Once, because we really wanted to know how they feel about our community, and me representing the Latino community. Something that I did is that I started the conversation speaking Spanish, and you could see their face. And after that, I asked, how did that make you feel? And some of them say confused, some of them say disengaged, some of them say bored. So some of the questions was like, so whenever you show up to a family's home and they speak a different language, how does that make you feel? And what are you willing to do to make sure that you respond to that crisis, adequately, and that you provide that service to them? So it was very honest conversations. They did brought up a lot of, they had a lot of questions about just overall our community. It was a panel that it was representing the Black community as well. So, sometimes it got intense. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes it got very intense just because we were not seeing eye to eye. They felt like they had an obligation to protect, not to serve. They felt like everybody should learn English right away. So it was a lot of just that cultural awareness, again, that I was talking about, that is so important. So I have been now invited to speak also with the new graduates. So last week I was there, a couple of us were talking about that cultural awareness again. And the new recruits were very, very engaged, and they had a lot of good questions related to our community. So I am very excited to be part of this, and especially because I can see and the only thing that I was hoping after all of these conversations is that at least I was able to bring that question to them as what does it really do an officer who responds to a crisis or interaction with a family that looks different than them. So I think definitely there's still a lot of work to do. But we, I think as community members, a lot of us are very committed to build that relationship and be that bridge between the community and the law enforcement.
Building on this idea of bridging between different communities, I have a question for you, Chief, from someone in the audience who says, you indicate that you support LGBT citizens. What does that mean in your role of Chief of Police?
Absolutely. So I have a sergeant, and she is my LGBTQ liaison, and I'll be meeting with her. For me, in Philadelphia, I had the Gay Officers Action League, which represented the officers in the LGBTQ plus community and could bring to me their concerns. One of the things that they did for me is they also trained the academy recruits. They put together a 2-hour block, and it was at least a 2-hour block, and what they talked about was what it was like to be an LGBTQ plus officer on duty, and what it was like to be a member of that community off duty when they interacted with their own fellow officers. And they talked about some of the really negative experiences they had. It involved having a permanent liaison to the LGBTQ plus community, which was a sergeant who was a member of the community. And we actually solved crimes that way because there is a mistrust. There is a lack of confidence that the police really care about members of the community when they are the victim of crime, and a belief that the police won't take it seriously. We actually solved a shooting just by having that liaison position and having someone who could talk to the victim who understood. It also meant that we gave a priority to addressing hate crimes and also hate incidents. Just because something doesn't rise to the level of a crime doesn't mean that it shouldn't be addressed by the police. You know, we had some very ugly incidents that occurred, and we made sure that we identified the person that perpetrated them, and we went out and made sure to have a talk with them. And maybe we couldn't make an arrest at that point, but we could send a message that we know who you are, we know what you did, and we're going to be watching you closely. And if you do it again the next time, we possibly might have enough to make an arrest, and if we do, and we certainly will, we created a website that was dedicated to the community they could go to look for resources. We did training with our officers. We made sure that officers in Center City, where a large section of Philadelphia is referred to as the gayborhood, that they had a resource booklet, so that when members of the community needed specialized services, they know who to call. So it was doing all of those things, and just sending a strong message that it matters. And it was all. I had an LGBTQ liaison committee of members of the community that advised me, and I found that to be very helpful. We had the first vehicle that was designed to represent the LGBTQ community, a police vehicle in the Pride Parade for the first time, and it really sent a very strong message to the community. I had some people that got very emotional over that. One gentleman said he thought he would never see this in his lifetime in Philadelphia. So it was just sending out that message of inclusion and that message that you matter to us, and that we're doing things to demonstrate that. We even had a couple incidents where the police were accused of wrongdoing, where the community, because of being transparent and sharing video, sharing the information that we had, we were able to show that the allegations didn't happen, and the community members helped me get the correct information out there and tamp down what was escalating an emotional state.
Marquita has a question about community-based police officers. Marquita, would you please make your way to the microphone? And while she's heading there, Desmond, I want to come back to you here and ask you, from your experience with youth and underserved communities, what is something that you think people largely just don't understand on this topic or need to know?
I would say that people need to understand that the youth in my community, people in my community, from my perspective, it seems like it's a whole different world. And if we're not proactive about building that bridge between law enforcement and the community, I would assume from a law law enforcement's perspective that that is a third world country, and that's the barriers that we need to overcome, create that empathy and realize that, all of these children, deserve the same chance. All people deserve the same chance, and I'm glad to hear about having the equity and inclusion board within the department. That's a big step, in just creating more opportunities and more transparency within the department and the community.
Thank you. Marquita, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a really quick, before I ask my question, I wanted to say really quick, I wish I would have been on the panel. I have 1,000 questions and we would have been having dialogue. But yeah, I do. Really quick, for the comments you made about data, I wanted to say really quick, data negates humanity. And I see the humanity in our officers as well as the humanity in our community. So when we speak to data, it negates the humanity and the life experiences of the people in our community. And so you had talked about you view the data and how you go out there and police communities and about poverty in communities, and that's why you target communities that have not, that you guys go into communities that have poverty and they tend to have more crime, and that you utilize data. So data kind of negates the humanity of the people in those communities. And it feels like a cop-out, and that pun is intended. We, especially in Wichita is not Philly, and there's fentanyl use all across this community. There's meth use all across this community. There's poverty on the south side. There's probably poverty on the north side. There's poverty on the northeast side, but yet northeast gets trafficked the hardest. And so I just wanted to say that really quick before I go into my question. And my question is, what does a model community-based police officer look like to all of you? So if we can have in our community an officer that feels good to us, that feels healthy, that feels safe, that is a server and a protector, what would that look like to each of you guys on the panel?
Who wants to go first? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just keep it simple. With anybody, I just ask that you be who you say you are. If you are a firefighter, I expect you to put out fires. If you are a lawyer, I expect you to represent me authentically. And if you are a police officer, I expect that you protect and serve.
I would just add to that we need police officers that are really engaged in the community and build the relationships before crime happens or before they're called to a crisis in a home. During those panels, we had conversations about how they don't have the time. They are always called to call. But there's always 5 minutes within their shift that they can actually engage with a child walking to school or from school, or someone walking, to get a drink or whatever that is. There's always that opportunity, but it just takes intention. And that intention, it just has to come from that officer to be not just an officer, but belong to the community and be part of the community that they represent. So just making sure that engagement is continuous, not just during events, but the everyday. So whenever they're called, they already have a face and they already have a relationship within that community.
Policing can't always be partnership, but I don't see how you have effective policing without partnership, because I don't see how people feel safe and secure and protected in their communities unless there's partnership at the root of that relationship.
I'm going to just address what I said. What I said was, or what I meant, to be clear, if I didn't make myself clear. If I have people, members of this community, being victimized at the same location over and over again, if I didn't look at that data and assign people to that location to try to prevent further victimization, then I wouldn't be doing my job. And that's what I meant, in that we use data to make sure that we are not over-policing, that we are focusing solely on the people that are victimizing the innocent and trying to prevent further victimization. In terms of the perfect community policer, I love what you said And it's what I try to instill in my officers. I tell them all the time. I talked about all the great Shop with a Cop programs that we did during Christmas. But you know what? If you were there and you received toys for your kids and you left to go home and you got pulled over by a police officer for a minor traffic violation and you were talked to rudely and treated with disrespect, well, it doesn't matter what happened during Shop with a Cop. That's your perception of the Wichita Police Department, and that's what I tell officers every single day. It's the way that they interact with the public in those everyday interactions when they're handling an auto accident, when you're taking a report of a theft, when you're handling a domestic. You got to speak to people with respect. You got to be kind. You got to be empathetic. And just as you said, there's always time to say hello. There's always time to engage, even if it's while you're answering 911 calls. But it is so critical that officers remember that officers be good communicators, that they be problem solvers in the community, that they be willing to listen to people and willing to engage with people and doing it in a humane way. That's my idea of a community policer, and that's what I think all police officers should be, and that's what we work towards.
We have many more questions, and we won't be able to get through all of them. I'm going to slip in one more here before we start to wrap it up tonight. This listener asks, domestic violence, they say domestic violence is a significant issue for Wichita. What's your plan to address this issue? And will you continue the domestic intervention and violence reduction team that started in 2020?
Every intention of continuing that. It is a significant problem. Very concerned by the scope of it, but I'm very happy by the work that our detectives are doing and the uniform officers that support them. I hope to increase training for the beat officers, as well as increased resources. And the perfect example of, and again, I agree with my fellow panelists about partnerships. It's so crucial that we work with our partners, that we take a very trauma-informed approach when we're dealing with the victims of domestic violence and the victims of sexual violence. And I think that I think we do I'm very impressed with the unit here in Wichita, and I look forward to giving them more resources in the future. But definitely taking a community-based approach, and that which includes education. Education of young people in our schools, and again, making sure that victims receive the support they need from the moment that they contact the police right through to prosecution.
Now, as a last question, I'd like each of you to address this. We've talked about so many different things and things that intersect and these very kind of snarly, complex issues related to law enforcement in Wichita. So as a final question for each of you, how can people help? How can individuals help to kind of ease this, move us through some of these issues into hopefully a brighter future? Who would like to start? I'm tempted to just go down the line. Do you want to start, Desmond?
No, keep it simple for sure. How can you help? Well, my name is Desmond Bryant, and I am the manager of Progeny, which focuses around juvenile justice reform. Next week, we're hosting a meeting around, it's called Freedom to Speak. What we work around is creating policy, creating leadership, through development, and we're hosting an event to invite all the youth out. So what I would want to help with, if you have any young people in your circles and your clubs and your churches, please invite them out, because it's a safe space where we talk about the issues that are going on in today's society. This is impactful because we always talk about mental health, and being able to use our stories, being able to use our artistic abilities to alleviate the trauma that we may have experienced growing up through the system, and all of these youth have been, impacted some kind of way, but we're all about change. We're all about that partnership, and we're just working to change the community that we see. It hurts my heart to see children dying in the street. It hurts my heart to see drive-bys. It hurts my heart to see young people dying. So that's why I'm really passionate about creating the change and being the change that we want to see.
Chris?
It's fitting, I guess, for the title of this event, but I think it's important to stay engaged. I think to reach the aspiration that I think many people have for this community, it's not going to change because of one chief, no matter how effective he might be at his role. So I think it's important for people to think about their role and think about where they might be engaged on this issue and keep talking about it, because the challenges that we're talking about are, in many cases, decades, if not longer, in the making. So we might want to think more deeply about how we move the needle in the direction we want it to go.
I agree. Engagement, and I think we need to encourage everyone to get involved in the conversation. Give their honest opinion about their interaction with law enforcement, good, bad, whatever that is, and reporting. I think when things are not working right, we need to speak up. We need to say it to hold people accountable. When things are working, what is it working, and what did the officer did well that we want to make sure that other officers are doing as well. But I believe holding accountable to everyone who is either law enforcement or whoever that is, we really as community, we have to come together regardless of the cultural background. I think we all have to be on the same page of what we really want to see in our police department, in our city, in our community. Our youth are important, and we all should be working together. And I'm talking about parents, youth, teachers, whoever has contact with youth. But we just want to, I think accountability is a huge thing, that we want to make sure that our community knows that they can come to, there is so many leaders out there in the community that they can be trusted, and they can guide them through the process to make sure that these conversations continue to happen.
Chief, what do you think? How can people get involved? How can they help average citizens?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of ways they can do that, but in my humble opinion, in the short time that I've been here, and I don't think it's any different in Philadelphia, whatever each of us can do to be a mentor to a young person, to provide a young person with, to give them some attention, to show that you're interested in how they're feeling, to ask them, what they think about things, and just to utilize your success in life to point them in the right direction and convince them that they have great potential and they have the potential to reach their dreams. I just don't, as the president of a large charity in Philadelphia, that was a large part of what we did, and I saw firsthand the difference that can make when someone takes an interest in a young person, in a young person's life, and tries to show them that there's a different way.
Thank you all for joining in this important conversation, and please check out the library's resource guide for more on this subject matter if you're interested. It's a wonderful resource. You can also find the recording of this and other Engage ICT discussions at engageict.org to share with friends and family. Thanks again for your time. For KMUW, I'm Sarah Jane Crespo.